social welfare today, and often for those in receipt of social welfare payments, this is their only source of income, and often they're left waiting. What's been happening?
Yeah, I had tabled some parliamentary questions following the campaign in relation to welfare fraud, because it struck me. We tend to see people coming through the office, for example, who are waiting for a long time for a payment, and essentially that was the other side of this. Yeah, I was asking myself, is the department deploying its resources in the most efficient way? What is its core function? And its core function really should be the payment of schemes. And, for example, there was a very significant backlog for the payment of maternity leave, and that was overcome by introducing overtime to clear up the backlog. So if you deploy, for example, the money that was spent on that campaign towards the payment of schemes, you overcome the backlog. And a lot of what happens in terms of what is termed, for example, fraud, ends up being mistakes, and often mistakes that are made on the department side. For example, the payment, I somebody who came to me who was paid an extra day 15 years ago and was followed up on it. So it can give a misinterpretation as well relative to the spend of the department. That's a very tiny portion, and there is a very effective unit within the department to deal with that on an ongoing basis. But some of the schemes, for example, the domiciliary care payment, which is a payment that's made to a parent who's a child who has a need greater than a child of the same age. So what they'll be is their children. They'll be children with some special needs. And it's a small enough payment that's made monthly to the parent. There was an 18-week, a 4.5-month delay in paying the 3,200 applicants for that. Now, I find with that, there tends to be, because we see quite a lot of those, there tends to be, almost an automatic rejection on a high level of them, and they tend to be very successful on appeal, which tends to mean to me that the amount of administration in the department that goes into it, in going into then dealing with the appeals, could probably be better used in terms of making sure that the people who are entitled to the payment in the first instance get it. Disability allowance, 12-week delay for someone that is, as you say, dependent on a payment because they're out of work. A carer's allowance, and sometimes there's a 13-week delay on that. Sometimes that can arise very suddenly, where, say, a family member has a stroke, and somebody has to leave work, and bridging that gap can be a very big difficulty for people. And then another one, there's a 12-week delay for the non-contributory state pension. There's a lot of the other schemes that are not in arrears in terms of the payment of the schemes. And I accept that some of these can be complex, but there's something like 82 million individual payments made in a given year in 2016, and they related to 1.7 million individual applicants. So there's a lot of schemes. There's 70 schemes in total. So it's quite a complex department with a very, very big budget. But the number one thing is that their core function is that the core function of the department is to pay the schemes. And where they're not paid efficiently then, and where the staff are under pressure because of backlogs, you're highly likely to get mistakes made by the pressure the staff are under. So the management of this department is really important. And where you get backlogs, it's quite important that the department deploys their resources towards where they're most needed, and that tends to be where there's a backlog, and sometimes that relates to overtime. So I would be quite critical of how the department went about, for example, the recent the recent social welfare cheats campaign, because essentially money was being deployed at a time where there was very significant backlogs, and I think the sanction for that happened as a consequence of the resources being used, for example, for that campaign.
Now, finally, Catherine, you mentioned up to an 18-week delay for some people. You're saying this is exorbitant, out of control. What needs to happen here?
Well, there's some things, for example, with the domiciliary care payment. When people come into us and say, how do I make this thing, we give them a health warning and we say you're more likely to be refused. So essentially we're saying to people themselves that they get as much evidence as possible. And sometimes the forms that the department provide give a misread on what is needed. They might give a small box which to fill in relation to, for example, the medical condition, and it gives the impression that that's all that's needed by virtue of the fact that that's the form that's provided. And essentially then it comes back and said there's insufficient evidence given, so they turn people down, particularly on things like a disability payment or a domiciliary care payment where there's a medical assessor involved. So the advice I would always give would be for people to get as much evidence as possible to provide to the department, so that so that the decision can be made in the first instance, and we're not looking at backlogs. Look, essentially an 18-week delay is a ridiculously long delay, and if it's a question that the department has got to bring people in even on a temporary basis, if the department has got to deploy staff on the basis of overtime being provided to clear those backlogs, it's unacceptable that there will be these delays, particularly at a time where people are at their most vulnerable, often people who will never have any other claim with the Department of Social Welfare. And just remember that the schemes, there's 70 schemes, they go right across the age range, from pensioners to child benefit and everything in between. So it has to remember its core function is to get these schemes paid in a timely way. So the management of the department is really important, but they really need to look at their own forms, because I think they're giving a misread to people, and what they're doing is they're generating work that is needless work, that is where you get something like over 50% of claims turned down and successful on appeal. There's something going wrong there.
Pat in Clane has texted in to say, fully agree with Catherine, shocking delays. Another texter says, my daughter is waiting for 6 weeks for her appointment with the social welfare placement officer as she wants to sign up for a course. When you ring the social welfare number to ask about any service, nobody answers and there is no answering machine. Catherine Murphy, thank you for that update.